Around the world, American restaurant chains are a familiar sight. The golden arches of McDonald's, the red buckets of KFC, the familiar slices of Domino's pizza. In India, these brands are not just present, they are thriving, growing, expanding. But this isn't simply a story of cultural export or consumer taste convergence. It's a story about institutional economics, how rules, incentives, and systemic gaps shape the expansion of global franchises in a rapidly evolving market. Let's begin with a fundamental observation. Quick service restaurants in India, often called QSRs, are experiencing dramatic growth. The sector is expected to grow at roughly a 23% compound annual rate between 2020 and 2025. Chains such as Pizza Hut, Domino's, KFC, Subway, Starbucks, and McDonald's are all positioned to benefit from this surge. To understand why American franchises are so successful in India, we need to zoom out from brand logos and menu boards and look at the institutional landscape, the economic, regulatory, and socio-demographic forces shaping this outcome. The most obvious factor is simple math. India has a massive, youthful population and rising disposable income. Urbanization is accelerating. A growing middle class is seeking convenient, standardized food experiences, the very product that American QSR models specialize in. These demographic forces change long-term demand assumptions in ways that institutional actors, franchisees, investors, and supply chain partners can interpret and monetize. But the institutional story runs deeper. In the United States, fast food and casual dining brands operate through franchise networks. A central franchisor sells brand rights, standardized systems, and operational manuals. Local franchisees make the capital investment, hire staff, source ingredients, and adapt to local conditions. In India, that same franchise model translates into a system that leverages local knowledge and capital while importing brand equity and operational discipline. This structure matters because it aligns incentives across disparate actors. The U.S. franchisor gains global brand reach at minimal capital risk. The Indian franchisee gains access to a proven business system, and consumers get consistent, recognizable offerings in markets that are efficient, scalable, and increasingly affluent. The numbers speak for themselves. Domino's has over 2,200 outlets in India, dwarfing the footprint of many other chains. KFC's Pizza Hut network, operated by local franchisees like Devyani International and Sapphire Foods, counts hundreds of locations, even as performance ebbs and flows amidst competition and cost pressures. Institutional incentives also operate in the regulatory space. India's business climate, while complex, has been progressively opening to foreign direct investment and franchise models. Tax reforms, infrastructure investments, and ease of doing business initiatives have lowered entry barriers for global brands. Regulatory certainty, even if imperfect, reduces risk for long-term capital commitments. Another institutional lever is local adaptation. American chains don't simply transplant U.S. menus and operations into India and hope for the best. They re-engineer products to match Indian dietary norms and preferences, including a disproportionately large vegetarian population. Domino's offers paneer tikka pizzas. KFC markets a paneer zinger. Starbucks serves regional flavors, and McDonald's adapts its mashups with local sauces and spices that resonate with Indian palates. These curated adaptations reduce the cultural distance between brand and consumer while protecting the core business model. Market structure plays a role as well. Many Indian cities still lack the saturation seen in U.S. markets. That leaves room not just for entry, but for rapid network expansion. The Indian quick-service market remains, by many measures, underpenetrated relative to developed economies, creating institutional space for American chains to scale store count aggressively. This is why brands such as Papa John's are planning multi-hundred store builds, after previously withdrawing in the face of competition, betting that the long-term demographic and economic trends will favor their growth. All of this exists within a system of institutional complementarities. Global capital markets that fund franchise expansion, local entrepreneurs who can navigate real estate, labor, and supply chains, evolving consumer culture that prizes convenience and brand familiarity, and a legal framework that accommodates international franchising. But institutional analysis also highlights the frictions and risks in this system. Fast food chains in India face rising operating costs intense competition, and regulatory complexities. Franchisees like Devyani International have reported widening losses in recent quarters, even as revenue grows, pointing to the cost pressures embedded in local labor laws, supply inflation, and competitive discounting. Then there's the strategic risk of market timing. India's economy remains dynamic, but urban consumers can be sensitive to price shocks and wage stagnation. International chains must balance standardization with calibrated pricing, a structural challenge that reflects institutional heterogeneity between markets. At the same time, some of the most interesting institutional developments are occurring on the edges of this system. Indian conglomerates are increasingly partnering with or producing for U.S. brands. For example, talks between the Indian snack giant Haldiram's and Inspire brands could see U.S. sandwiches manufactured locally. This represents not merely a transactional partnership, but a reconfiguration of global supply networks that leverages Indian manufacturing capacity and distribution expertise. Another instance of institutional adaptation. What does this tell us about globalization and institutional economics? First, global brand expansion is not a one-way broadcast of American culture. It is a mutual adaptation process shaped by policy, local entrepreneurship, market incentives, and institutional complementarities. U.S. franchises succeed in India not because of brand alone, but because the institutional architecture, regulatory frameworks, franchise law, market growth, consumer preferences coherently supports that expansion. Second, the presence of American chains in India highlights the institutional layering of markets. Franchisors export systems, not just products. Franchisees translate those systems into operational realities. Local regulators define the rules of engagement. Consumers complete the circuit by participating at scale. Each part of the system has incentives and constraints that, when aligned, produce the outcome we observe. Third, institutional analysis sharpens our understanding of risk and opportunity. The Indian QSR market is growing, but it is not frictionless. Regulatory changes, cost inflation, competitive pressures from domestic chains, and macroeconomic shifts all influence the stability of that growth. Institutions, after all, shape not just advantage, but vulnerability. In the end, the story of U.S. food franchises in India is less about fast food as cultural export and more about global institutional alignment, capital mobility, franchise law, consumer income trajectories, and systemic incentives that make scale both possible and economically rational. American restaurants in India are thriving because the system, not simply the brand, makes it possible.